Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very, very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey, and I'm absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to interview Kamini Wood, a certified life coach whose mission is to help high achievers heal their relationships with themselves by motivating and supporting them as they take courageous steps to identify their limiting beliefs, uncover the reasons for their stagnation, and overcome their self-doubt in order to live more fulfilling professional and personal lives. Kamini will be speaking to us today from Cary, North Carolina. Kamini is the creator of AuthenticMe and the CEO of her coaching company, Live Joy Your Way, which specializes in helping high performers and overachievers navigate past traumas and toxic relationships. And oh boy, do we want to hear more about that. Empowering them to live with impressive self-acceptance, self-confidence, and self-leadership. In other words, Kamini helps her clients to heal and transform their lives, which beautifully resonates with the mission of Grief and Rebirth podcast. In addition to her training in internal family systems and cognitive behavioral-based coaching, Kamini holds certifications in various modalities, including life, wellness, and high-performance coaching, teen life, conscious uncoupling, calling in the one, new money story, breath work, meditation and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm curious as to when she gets time to sleep. She is also trained in conscious parenting and coaching for children. I'm looking forward to talking with Kamini, who calls herself a recovering perfectionist, about the difference between coaching and therapy, how she helps her clients to heal their relationships with themselves so that they can recognize their true value and self-worth, the ways a person can form a healthier relationship to money, and that is so important, her tips for healthy boundaries, another important subject, and more for what will surely be a very insightful and very powerful interview. Hi, Kamini. A sincere, warm welcome to Grief and Rebirth podcast.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So let's start with this question. Let's help everybody get to know you and where you started from. Would you like to tell us, please, about your early years and why did you never feel good enough, and explain why you now call yourself a recovering perfectionist?
Absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in Connecticut. It was predominantly white. My parents were both immigrants themselves. My mom came to the States when she was probably 13 or 14. My dad when he was about 19, 20. So my sister and I, as I mentioned, were these little Indian girls in a predominantly white town. My parents worked really hard. They were trying their level best to provide for my sister and I. And during that time period, as I was going through elementary school, one thing that was very apparent for me as a little girl was that I was different. The color of my skin was darker than most other children. My name was obviously different. So there was a lot of that internalization at the time of trying to figure out how I belonged, how I could be accepted amongst this peer group that was not the same as me. You know, I was definitely a different person. At the same time, my parents were working really hard, and I do not fault them at all. One of the things that I started to do as a little girl, though, was wanting to ensure that I wasn't a problem. I wasn't a burden to them because they were working so hard. So you have this little girl, 5, 6 years old, going to elementary school, trying to figure out how she belongs in this group of peers, and then also trying not to cause problems or be a burden for her parents because She could see that I'm a very highly sensitive person, and I've been that way my whole life. So that's where it all started. It was, how do I fit in? How do I belong? And so the perfectionism and the people pleasing started there. And I know this now as an adult, as I look back. At the time I didn't, but really what it was this little girl trying to figure out how to create friendships, how to create a community. And in that was, well, if people are happy with me and I do what they want, then of course they're going to accept me. And if I am this high achiever and a perfectionist and I don't fail, now I'm not being a burden to my parents because they don't have to worry about me. And so that just snowballs in and of itself. And so that's where it began. And it carried that through my adulthood. Right.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting thing because I didn't know it at the time, right? That when I actually learned and realized it was happening was as a mom. I recognized those attributes and personalities starting to show up in my own kids, and
Yeah,
recognizing
that's
that
so
they were getting that
interesting
from
because
me.
they were mimicking you. It wasn't necessarily something that they genetically inherited.
Exactly.
They were
Exactly.
just subconsciously kind of
They
mimicking you, right?
they were mirroring my behavior and how I was showing up and in that personality trait. Because kids are sponges, right? And
Mhm.
so when I realized that if I wanted to shift something for my children, because I recognized, I could see how it was starting to inhibit my children. And that's the moment, my catalyst moment, where I realized, oh my goodness, this is coming from me. And so I went through my own self transformation. And it happened at the time when I was also in my work life, really helping others figure out what their paths were and how to grow and expand. So you have this professional trajectory that was happening, as well as this personal transformation. And in that when those two things collided, that's really truly where I realized, okay, this is actually my calling, to take this experience that I had, that this not good enough story that I personally had, and I can, now that I understand it on a deeper level, take my professional experience, bring those things together, go get trained, right? You mentioned my training. I'm a nerd, so I went and I've definitely
Oh
gotten
my God,
trained.
you're amazing. I mean, I read the list of things you've done. I was like, oh, wow, wow, wow.
I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. You have to bring all of those things together, and that's really what my calling is. It's to help other people recognize what's holding them back in order to move themselves forward.
That's great. I'm very curious about your sister. Was she that way also? Are you the older or the younger one?
I'm the younger one. So my sister, she's not
She
much of a people
reacted in a
pleaser.
different way.
She handled it a different way. She is a little more extroverted than I am. I'm definitely more introverted. So we handled it differently. And again, that's why I think people need to take the time to recognize what's their story, what's their narrative. Because if we don't take the time to recognize that for ourselves, we can't actually move forward. We're still living somebody else's story.
That's true. So true. So now I know I don't know when you had time for this, honestly, and it's not my business, but you have 5 kids also with everything else you've done. So you're a mom to 5 kids, 2 of whom are high performing young adults like their mom. So how did they inspire your mission? They sort of inspired it because you saw that they were taking on your traits, right?
Well, yes, and then so my oldest is a ballerina and my second oldest is a Division 1 athlete, and they had these aspirations. And I could see within them how their perfectionism was starting to hold them back. And so there was a lot that I was recognizing of my personality traits that they were emulating. And of course, recognizing that you don't have to give those things up. Like, you can actually still be a high achiever. It's just, can we do it in you know with respect to what else we want to achieve, right? We don't have to cut ourselves down in order to be a high achiever. We don't have to put ourselves in this place of, if I don't do X, then I must be a failure. It's about recognizing what is that inner dialogue about. And so truthfully, it was my own children that actually inspired my work with teenagers, because what we tend to forget is that we have, from, like I said, my story started when I was 5 or 6 years old.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
recognizing that if we can actually start working with our young adults from an earlier age, we actually can help them recognize what those limiting beliefs are from that earlier stage, so that they can start working through them and they don't get to the age, 30s, 40s, and 50s, where they're trying to figure out what in the world is going on for me? Why can't I move myself forward?
When a person's a perfectionist,
Mhm.
how does that color their effectiveness in the world? Is it that they have such a high standard for themselves that there's no give, that they take failure as, I mean, tell me,
Mhm.
how do you lighten that burden that someone that you'd put on yourself, that your children would put on themselves? How do you lighten that burden? How do you mindset it for them to say you don't have to be perfect in everything that you do? It's okay.
Yeah, and there's different like shades of perfectionism too, right? There's the internalized perfectionism where I'm holding myself to this really high standard and I have to do it perfectly. And what ends up happening is a lot of times those types of perfectionists will not show up and move themselves forward because they end up becoming so afraid of failing that they just don't actually move forward. And then,
Wow.
of course, you have that externalized perfectionism where you have such high standards that you hold other people to those high standards too. And if they
Oh,
don't meet them, then that starts to affect your relationships with other people. So I definitely have worked, for instance, with clients who have that external perfectionism and they're holding their children to this really high standard, and it's actually detrimentally affecting their relationship with their children. And so it really is a mindset shift where for me personally, it was an internalized perfectionism. And so I recognized that for instance, there were times when I would be afraid to try something because I was afraid I couldn't do it perfectly. And with my children, that was one of the things that we really worked through, was recognizing that there is no perfect way to do something. There is just your way to do it. And if you continue to grow and evolve from every instance that you have, you continue to move yourself forward. And I will say that both of my two older kids, they still have to go through it to this day because they want so much to get it right. And they still have to do that mindset work that recognizes I'm still growing and evolving. And that's really what matters, because if we get it perfect, there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere to expand to. And so just in that realm of recognizing that as humans, we're constantly growing and evolving, constantly learning, we can release this need to get it perfect.
oh, wow. That really lets you off the hook. And not only that, I think it releases people from very high judgment of others
Mm.
that they don't meet their standard. That's a hard thing. Like when you talk about a kid, that's a hard thing for a child to live with if the parent has such high standards for them, right? It sets up
Yes.
all kinds of things. So then they need to go to therapy or coaching. What's the difference? And why should a person hire a coach instead of a therapist?
So I'm going to give you my version and the way that I describe the difference. So for me, the distinction I'll use is diagnosis versus decision. Therapy is more of a diagnosis of a root cause problem, and then together with the therapist's help, you'll psychoanalyze that problem and you'll try to fix it. Coaching takes the perspective of decision. I recognize this is where I am today, and I'm deciding that I want to move forward. So with the coach as your co-collaborator, you're working towards how to take the committed actions to move forward. Now, the work that I do, we do look in the past for patterns and just to understand what certain belief systems and narratives are in order to bring those up to the awareness, because sometimes they're in the subconscious. We have to bring them up to the awareness that now we can actually take a committed action because we've brought the subconscious to the conscious. Um, the best metaphor that I can use is that of a flower. So when you have a flower and you recognize that certain petals are not blooming, with your coach, essentially the both of you are going into the soil together, figuring out what serves that flower versus what doesn't, and then together really putting the efforts into setting goals and aspirations around the things that would serve the flower and watch those petals bloom and grow,
Oh, that's lovely.
versus that of a bud, right? Where the therapist is going into the roots of the actual flower to try to figure out what's going on. The way that I describe in terms of what would lead somebody to work with a coach, it's really about somebody who's deciding that this is where they are today and they're ready to move forward, and they want somebody to walk with them to help set those goals and help them with that accountability and to be that sounding board to move forward, versus a therapist is going to help, like I mentioned, help with the diagnosis and really work through those diagnoses. A coach is not meant to diagnose
So
you.
maybe someone goes to therapy if they've been tremendously wounded to find the root cause of what's going on, and then they'd continue on with the coach to take action after
Yes,
they
I've actually
understand
had
after they
I have
understand that.
And I've had several clients who've done that in the past where they have gone through therapy. And because I wholeheartedly believe in therapy, I would never say that somebody should, first of all, people should pick exactly what's the right fit for
Right,
them.
right, right.
However, I have definitely had clients who've gone through therapy, done that work with their therapist, and now they're ready to work with a coach to continue moving themselves
Yeah,
forward.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. Now you help your clients learn how to reduce stress and anxiety and work through trauma. Bravo, comedy. And you use a holistic approach for that, right? So what do you do? How do you bring down those stress levels and help them to work
Yeah.
through that
Yeah.
trauma?
So the way that I work with my clients is not just cognitively. So we also use somatic approaches as well, because our body, first of all, is so intelligent and holds so much information. And when we do go through a trauma, our body's holding on to it. When we're stressed and we're over anxious and overwhelmed, again, our body's having a reaction. So through my coaching and that holistic approach, we're paying attention to how our body is and what we're feeling within our body as a key indicator to let us know, hey, we're actually overwhelmed. Like, so for instance, when I am feeling very anxious, I immediately will feel this tightness in the pit of my stomach. And so working with my clients, we help recognize the different signs and symptoms, and then we can actually work through it from a cognitive level. So there's this bottom up approach versus we can't just think through a problem simply
Take it
because
out of here and start bringing
and
it
exactly,
down.
because it's really connecting the whole body and mind together, because we are one being, right? And so if we try to just do it from the mind, we can have 1,000 thoughts a day. So really it's how are we actually integrating it within ourselves as well.
Not only that, you probably have clients who are first discovering that, oh my goodness, my body responds to all this stuff going on up here. They're not even aware that
They're
that
not
happens
aware.
until you
Yeah.
enlighten them
It's
about
really
that.
interesting that you say that, because I've actually had clients where I will slow them down and I'll say, okay, so where did you feel that in your body? When they're telling me about a specific event that was very, where they felt extraordinarily stressed out and anxious, and they look at me kind of strange, like, what do you mean? And so we have to go through it together, and we slow down and go back to that moment. And then they're like, oh my God, oh my gosh. And then the work is to recognize, wow, my body tells me that it's like the first moment. And if I just pay attention to that, I actually can catch it before I spiral, which is huge.
Which is huge. The other
Mhm.
thing I'm thinking is that would be particularly huge, I'll bet, when you're working with children, because children, they spiral very easily with
Mhm.
their emotions, and and it
Mhm.
probably helps you to make them aware, to bring them down into their bodies and make them aware of what's going on before they react, right? I would think.
It definitely helps. The other thing that I do with the children that I work with is make their feelings absolutely valid. I think one of the things that we forget is that all feelings are 100% valid. Not all behaviors are, right? So if I can create this safe space for my clients, whatever their age is, to say, whatever you're feeling is 100% okay, because that information, that emotion, that feeling, as I say to my clients all the time, and they start to laugh because I'll constantly say, okay, well, it's a data packet. It's a data packet. And really what I'm saying there is it's communicating, it's illuminating, and it's motivating us. It's communicating what's happening for us. It's illuminating what we might need or what value is not being met. And it's going to motivate us to take an action to move towards that. And so especially with my younger clients, I really hone in on this idea that all emotions are valid, because so often there's these messages of, don't cry, be brave, or
Mhm.
we don't have time for you to yell and scream, or we don't need everybody to hear us. It's the emotions are valid, not all behaviors are, right? So if you're feeling angry, it's not to say anger is bad. It's just we can't go into a rage and start punching a wall. That behavior is not okay. But anger itself is here to tell us something, just like grief. It's here to tell us, what is it that we need? What is that value that's not being met? On the other side of love is pain. Why do they go hand in hand? Because without pain, you don't really love. The pain is actually showing that we loved someone or something really deeply. And so you can't have one without the other. It's,
That's
sun
so
and shadow.
wise. That's so wise. And I'm thinking about, there's so many people who their children are exhibiting behaviors and they don't know what to do. And I would think you'd be a wonderful resource for that. Do you work with kids online also?
I do. I actually, my whole practice is virtual. I work with kids Generally, the youngest I'll work with them on Zoom is about 9 years old, because with that age group, anything
They
younger
can
than
start
that,
their,
the Zoom doesn't really work as well. And so we vary the times. You know, like when I'm working with somebody who's 9, it's going to not be as long of a session, because again, attention span, and we don't really want them to be stuck to a computer
Mhm.
screen for a really long time.
Right.
But what I have found is that the ability to meet with them online, because of, I mean, I actually think in that sense, that was a blessing. It was part of COVID that taught us that we actually can do this online. We don't have to only be in person with each other. But the rapport that I'm building with my clients, whatever their age is, allows them to know that the space that we're creating is 100% safe for them to really experience what they need to.
I mean, you're changing their process. When they go into something, you're getting them to slow down and
Mhm.
face it a different way, and the parents must be very grateful. So tell us about imposter syndrome, and you help your clients to overcome this imposter syndrome so they can rediscover what you call their authentic me. Tell us about
Mm.
that.
So the imposter syndrome is really that misfire in our brain where because something is new, it's not in our comfort zone, it's in our growth zone. There's that misfire in our brain that says, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm a fake. I'm a fraud. I'm gonna be
Oh,
figured out." All that self-doubt comes creeping in that says, "I can't do this." A lot of high achievers will, and it's really interesting because people are like, "Well, high achievers, how can they have imposter syndrome?" They have it a lot. I work with executives who are constantly thinking to themselves, they're going to find me out. They're going to think I'm a fraud. And really, it's because as a high achiever, you're constantly edging and you're constantly going above, pushing that outside of the comfort zone, the next level, the next level. And that imposter syndrome comes in to say, oh, you can't do that. So it's all that self-doubt. So really what I'm working on with my clients is recognizing, where is that narrative coming from? Because most often it's a narrative that was probably assimilated between the ages of 0 to 7, because that's where most of these things are imprinted. And it's probably a narrative of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or there's something, whatever that little narrative is, that limiting belief, that false belief was imprinted, and it's been carried through. Even if it was like, I refer to it as like the refrigerator hum, the noise that's
right,
kind of
right,
there. We
right,
don't
right.
know it's there, but it's operating underneath all this time. So what we're doing together is bringing it up into the awareness, because now that we know it's there, now we can do something about it.
So what do you do
Otherwise, it's
about
just
that? So
underneath.
someone's heading a huge
Mhm.
corporation, or they're taking on a new endeavor or whatever it is in their lives, and they say, I'm supposed to know everything, but I don't. And I don't want these people around me to know that I don't. How
Mhm.
do you change that mindset?
Well, one of the things that we talk about is, do you really have to know everything?
Ah,
Right? Again, that's a false belief that I have to know everything. The truth is, none of us know everything. We figure it out on the way, and we learn how to self-trust that if I don't know this answer, I'm going to go figure it out. And it's rebuilding that ability, that self-trust, that you're going to be able to go do that. That's
right.
part of it. The other part of it is to challenge it. It's like, well, how many times have you had successes? Where have you actually been, you didn't know something, and you then figured it out. I'm working with a woman right now who's just completely climbing up that corporate ladder, and I'm so excited for her. And just recently, yet another iteration of a potential promotion for her, and she had this moment of, I don't know if I can do this. And so we talked through it, and it said, how many other times have you met that, and that question came up of, I don't know that I can do this, and what did you do, and what were the steps, and what were the strengths you leaned into? And as her co-collaborator, we unpack that together, and she suddenly sees, oh yeah, that I took this step and this step and this step. And so we start breaking that down, because really the imposter syndrome is just a false belief that I'm not going to be able to figure it out, or I'm not smart enough. And so
Or
once
I'm
we
not
can
surrounded by other
challenge it.
people who that's maybe their expertise, and I don't have to be perfect, have all the answers, right?
Exactly. I can lean on people. I can go search out answers. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
beautiful. What are some of the modalities that you utilize to help your clients quiet their inner listen to me, quiet their inner critic, overcome self-judgment, and own their stories? I mean, are there specific modalities besides talking that you do with?
So I really do utilize internal family systems as a major part of the coaching that I do, as well as the acceptance commitment based coaching, and as well as CBT. I have kind of made the Kamini version of that, where I've taken the pieces that really resonate. And of course, by being trained in each of those modalities, I feel that I can meet the client with whatever they assimilate to best, because some clients will do better with CBT based coaching versus other clients can understand the internal
CBT
family
is
space.
cognitive behavior
Cognitive
therapy.
behavioral.
Okay.
Yes. So that's different than maybe the internal family systems, where that's based in parts, understanding that there's these parts of us, right? So for me personally, I resonate with that idea, like, oh my gosh, there's this part of me that is really beating myself up right now. What is she trying to accomplish? And most often for me, the part that is really critical and judgmental is trying to keep me safe. It's trying to keep me from potentially hearing that from somebody else. So that part of me tries to tell me first, so that if somebody else judges me, it doesn't hurt as much. So I work with clients on whatever resonates with them best. But so I've really utilized different aspects of it for different people. But the other one that I really do utilize a lot too is values-based coaching. So it's, let's really get to your core values as an individual, because many of us, especially adults, they don't actually know what their core values are. They started, they brought up in a family system, and the values that were the family systems kind of carried them through. They haven't slowed down to ask, are those really my core values at this point in life? So that's a lot of it too, because if we can use our values as where we're going and using that as our ground zero, it absolutely can help move us forward.
You're helping people to separate out from their stories and to
Absolutely.
discover themselves.
Mhm.
And when you're separating out from your story, it's very important to establish a healthy boundary system, right? So
Yes.
that's really hard for everyone, I think, or for most people. So would you like to share some of your best tips for setting healthy boundaries, and how does that help a person become more authentic? And it's hard to set a healthy boundary, because I just overheard also that you're a high sensitive, as am I.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
high sensitive people really fear
Mhm.
setting boundaries, because we're going to lose people in our lives, or they're going to get mad at us. So
Yep.
just teach us,
Yeah.
educate us. Kamini, tell us
Bound-
about this boundary thing.
Boundaries, so often many things come all full circle back to boundaries. So boundaries are really important. The best way that I can describe boundaries, there's different types. So you've got your rigid boundaries, which I equate to setting up a wall. I'm here, you're there. There's this big wall in between us. Then you've got your porous boundaries, which is, I'm going to try to say, I don't like this, or this is not okay, but the moment somebody pushes on that, the boundary goes away and there's no boundary at all. And then you've got your healthy boundaries, which my metaphor for that is a fence. With a fence, there is this line where it's, I'm on this side, you're on that side. But with a fence, you also have a gate, so you can open and let people in, and you can close the gate and not let people in, right? So there's this ability to still see people, talk to people, hear people, because you can do all of that with a fence. And oh, by the way, fences can be moved, which means that a healthy boundary, if it's healthy, we can set a boundary here and maybe we need to move it in the future, and that's okay too. When we're talking about boundaries, what I like to say is the people who will have the most negative reaction to the boundaries we have set are the people who have benefited from us not having any boundaries in the first place. I think it's really important that people hear that, because it is scary. It's very scary to set boundaries when you haven't set them before, because the fear is, I'm going to lose people. And here's the
Exactly.
truth. The people who are meant to be in your life are going to respect your boundaries. The people who choose never to respect your boundaries are the ones who are benefiting from you not having them and are not necessarily showing up in a respectful way. Because if you're communicating to somebody, this is okay and this is not okay, and they're not willing to work with you on that, you have to start taking a look at that relationship. And that's really important to pay attention to, because there is no reason why we should not be able to communicate to other people if something is not okay for us versus if something is okay. The other important thing is recognizing that setting boundaries for ourselves is important. And what I mean by that is, recognizing and saying to ourselves, like, for instance, I'm going to say yes to this versus I'm going to say no to that. Right? That's an internal boundary. For me, that was getting rid of the people pleaser. That was, if I say yes to this, I'm actually choosing to do it versus allowing myself to recognize I don't have the capacity to say yes to this. And that's me setting a boundary for myself, that I don't have to say yes
That's
to every
about
single thing.
self-respect, I would think, right?
Mhm,
And some people,
mhm.
they don't really learn to love themselves or have self-respect.
Well, part of it is self-respect. And it's also in terms of, in reference to the people pleasing, for me, it was a lot around making sure that I didn't offend people, because it was being a highly sensitive. I did not want to hurt anyone's feelings. And that, so then I had to start setting a boundary for myself, recognizing I'm not responsible for other people's feelings. And that's a big one, is a lot of us take on other people's feelings as though we need to fix it. So if they're upset, or they get upset with us, we have to take a look at how did we communicate, for instance. If we communicated in a loving, compassionate way, and we were just communicating our thoughts and our ideas, and somebody got upset, there has to be a line where we allow them their autonomy to deal with that feeling themselves, and we're not trying to fix it for them. Which, again, as a people pleaser or a highly sensitive, that can be difficult. But that's what I mean by setting a boundary, where it's like, oh, they're upset. I can have empathy that they're not feeling that they're upset, but I don't have to take it on as mine to fix.
Right, and which I think high sensitives do all the time. We take it on absolutely as ours, or we feel, or we say to someone that your behavior to me is not okay, and they say, well, that's the way I am, and you don't know that you have a choice as to whether you're going to keep that person in your life, or establish distance or whatever, because whether that bothers them, it bothers you. So it's about, right? It's about
Yes,
being sensitive to your own needs and respecting
exactly.
it. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
And so that ties back into your question. It's like, how does that relate to the authentic me? Well, the authentic me is, what are my needs? What are my needs? What are my desires? What are my wants? And recognizing that it's okay to name them, know them, and communicate them. Because when we're able to show up as that person and we're communicating our needs, now we're our real person, our authentic self, versus trying to fit in or trying to be a version of ourselves that makes other people happy.
and a healthy relationship with someone is someone who respects your feelings and your boundaries.
Exactly.
Even though
Exactly.
maybe it doesn't resonate with who they are, but they know that's who you are, right?
Yes.
Okay, now
Yes.
speaking of boundaries, and let's go to another one, a person's relationship with money. Oh, let's talk about what a bad relationship with money looks like, and how do you help a person form a healthier relationship to money?
So this is really interesting, because for me, what I've learned working with individuals, especially when they have money stories, it goes back to, what are the limiting beliefs? What's the narrative that started in our younger years? And so when we're talking about the relationship with money, it's not just, it's not just budgeting, right? Absolutely, that's part of being financially aware, but that's not the work that I do with my clients. It's recognizing, what are those old stories? What are those old beliefs? Because a lot of times people don't have this belief that they don't deserve it. I don't deserve to have money. I don't deserve to have abundance and whatnot. And it comes from messages that they received when they were younger. Again, not big traumas. I call them the little t traumas, because what they are just messages or experiences that they had. They internalized them. They made it mean something, and they've carried it through into their adulthood. So the work that we're really doing with these money stories is understanding what's that old story, recognizing that old story, owning that old story, and then it's about rewriting it. And now that I'm an adult and where I am right now, what's actually true for me, and what do I really want for myself, and then what actions am I going to take to actually commit to and move myself forward? That's where that whole decision part of coaching comes in. It's, okay, what are my committed actions, and now how am I going to hold myself accountable?
That makes tremendous sense. And I'm wondering also, when people grow up, if they grow up in a monetarily deprived situation, do they, sometimes they probably grow up thinking, well, this is the way I grew up, I guess this is my lot, I'm going to be poor all my life. And you're changing that mindset also to kind of give themselves permission to have affluence in the world, and not because if your family doesn't have affluence, doesn't that set up they could resent you, or there are all kinds of dynamics about that would hold you back. I'll lose love or whatever, or I won't fit in anymore, or all of that. So you're giving them permission to change that, again, to change that mindset.
Yes, that's part of it. And then sometimes it's also more of it on the subconscious level too, where it was, maybe family didn't have a whole lot growing up, or the message was, you have to work hard, and the people who have a lot of money don't care, right? They don't care. They're not kind people, right? And so if that's kind of playing in the subconscious, then there might be this subconscious humming of the refrigerator, so to speak, operating, where it's, if I have a lot of money, I'm going to become an unkind person. So
Oh,
subconsciously, we keep
interesting.
ourselves held back from actually being able to move ourselves forward, because subconsciously there's this idea that if I have affluence, I might not be a good person. So we're really bringing that again to up into the awareness, like what are those stories? What are those narratives? And then we can challenge them. And we can really say, just because you have affluence, does that suddenly make you lose all of your values? But your values are still here. So does affluence really change the fact that these are still your values? And we work through it that way.
I think that's brilliant. And now, as a grandmother to 3 boys, I cannot resist having you tell us what is conscious parenting, and please explain how you coach. I love that you coach children. I think that's wonderful.
Well, conscious parenting is referring to the fact that what we as parents need to recognize is many times we are coming from a place of our own projections. So it's like what I was talking about earlier. I recognize that I was coming from this place of showing up as a people pleaser and a perfectionist, and I was then projecting some of my fears, some of my own anxieties onto my children as I was raising them, as I'm communicating to them, how I react to different situations. And so with conscious parenting, what we're recognizing is as parents, we have to do our own work so that we recognize that if we are potentially projecting our own stories or our own fears onto our children as we're raising them. This happens a lot that I see, especially, if we look at like middle schoolers and high schoolers, when things start to get more complicated, a lot of parents are starting to work out their own stories of what happened to them, perhaps when they were teenagers. And so as they're showing up, they're communicating to their children without totally working out their own stuff. And to be a conscious parent means I'm going to work on my stuff so that I don't project that onto my children.
Maybe being a conscious parent is also learning I'm going to stop that legacy. Maybe
Mhm.
recognizing something happened to me that wasn't necessarily the most wonderful thing, and I'm passing that along. I got to stop that legacy, figure it out for myself, so my
Exactly.
kid will not continue that, right? That unhealthy behavior. That's so important. Tell us, you got so much going on, Kamini. You got one-on-one coaching. You have a stress and overwhelm online course. You have a Rise Up online course. And I know you have an offer for our Grief and Rebirth podcast audience today. And I got to tell you, I think you're terrific. So tell us all about all that you do. That's wonderful.
Well, so the stress and the Rise Up course that I have are sort of my, what I would say the beginnings, if somebody was interested in working with me, but they didn't necessarily have the ability to, in terms of time or investment, to work on that one-to-one with me. So the stress and the Rise Up course really start to give you a taste of, for the stress, we're really working on specifically, what does it mean to be stressed and overwhelmed, and what tools can we use in order to bring down that stress? Because here's the thing, chronic stress leads to not just physical ailments, it absolutely leads to emotional ailments. That's where we see a lot of anxiety issues as well as depressive issues popping up when we're not dealing with that chronic stress. Because
not only that, but physically high blood pressure and all that stuff, right?
Absolutely. And the Rise Up program is just the beginnings of really recognizing where the elements of what I do, which is a lot of recognition of where stories are coming from, doing that inner work, becoming self-aware. I give you some elements to put into practice, unlearning those old stories and programming them. So it's really a taste into what we could do on a deeper level if we worked one-to-one, but it allows people the ability to get started on their own. And then of course the one-to-one program, which is really working with me either on a 6-month or a 12-month basis. And we are going deep diving in and moving you forward from where you are today to where you want to be. And yes, I do have an offer for your listeners. If they go to my website, they can download an ebook on limiting beliefs, and it's free. All you have to do is put in your email address and you'll have the PDF emailed over to you.
I think that's wonderful. I would definitely do that. I think that's great. And tell me why it's important for people to heal their relationship with themselves.
I truly believe that the most important relationship we have is the one with ourselves. From there, that's where we're building all of the other relationships we have. So recognizing how we see ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, understanding that if we can get to a place of true self-acceptance, and what I mean by that is, lots of people talk about self-love and self-esteem and self-confidence, and absolutely 100%, but I believe that all encompassing is self-acceptance, recognizing that we will accept all parts of ourselves and all imperfections as well as perfections, right? The good with the bad, the shadow with the light. When we get to that place, and we really solidify that foundation, that's how we can move forward professionally and personally. That's the foundation for it all.
You're kind of saying we're going to let ourselves off the hook, right? Accept ourselves, right?
Yes.
And then you hear your
Yes.
relationship with yourself, then you are basically role modeling for so many other people, right? And what is the Kamini tip for finding joy in life?
The Kamini tip is the tip that I use for myself, which is when we're up against a challenging moment, or we're up against something that just is frustrating us, it's okay. How is this happening for me? That's really the question I go back to, is how is this happening for me? Because when we can recognize that each and every thing that we're enduring, even if it is challenging, even if it is stressful or it's saddening, if we can come back to that one basic question of what can I take from this? How is this happening for me? That those two little questions, it allows us to find the nugget, the one nugget, which is how we really truly live in joy, right? It's what's the one right thing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Kamini. Kamini, thank you so much for you're an admirable role model and guide, working with and empowering high-performing adults and young adults to heal their relationship with themselves in order to become highly resilient self-leaders. I want to thank you from my heart for this insightful and powerful interview that will surely inspire many in our audience to heal their relationship with themselves, to live more fulfilling professional and personal lives. And some of them may be reaching out to you to even achieve more. And what a great idea. And here's a loving reminder, everyone, that you can see the show notes and all Grief and Rebirth podcast episodes on ireneweinberg.com. And make sure to follow us and like us on social at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And as I like to say, to be continued, many blessings, and bye for now. And thank you so much, Kamini.